Welcome to the 114th episode of Patterson in Pursuit. This week I'm speaking with Mr. Patri Friedman. Patri is the founder of Pronomos Capital, the founder of the Seasteading Institute. He's a former engineer at Google, a former professional poker player, and a member of the scholarly Friedman family, the grandson of Milton Friedman. He's overall a fascinating guy, but we are talking about none of the things in his bio. Instead, we are returning to the subject of health and medicine, and we're discussing his experience and research with sleep apnea. So how did that crossover happen? Well, as I mentioned in the beginning of the interview, Patri wanted somebody to share his research with, so I volunteered, and he agreed, and we made it happen. So this is a less structured interview than normal, but if you're interested in sleep apnea, I guarantee that you're going to find this valuable. We talk about a ton of different things, different theories about the causes of apnea, different interventions, surgeries, things like mouth taping and mewing, and the different researchers that he's listening to in this domain. So if that's a subject that you're interested in, I hope that you enjoy my conversation with Patri Friedman. All right, I'm joined by Mr. Patri Friedman. First of all, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's very nice to meet you.
Yeah, great to meet you as well.
So this is going to be a little bit different than the other interviews that I've done because I wanted to give you some space just to speak and share information from your end, because you made a Facebook post a couple of weeks ago and you said you had done a lot of research on sleep apnea and you have personal experience with sleep apnea, and you wanted a place to share this information with somebody that could either, record it or write it down. And it overlaps strongly with the research we've been doing. And we're also interested in sleep apnea. And I thought, okay, well, I'll volunteer. I'd love to hear the research that you've done. I've got several questions for you, and I'll bring it up. We'll have a conversation, but I figured I'd just give you some space to share what you have in mind on what you want to share on this topic. So I guess a good first place to start would be, what has your own personal experience been with sleep apnea?
I started having trouble sleeping, I would say, like in college, and it kind of got worse over time. Sometime maybe in my late 20s, I think maybe the first time I kind of went in for a sleep study, they were just like, try these CBT type things. And that didn't really help. And then, it's one of these things where you're like, oh, I tried a doctor and it didn't work. So what's the point? But eventually I tried again, and I actually got seen by Guilleminot at Stanford, the person who discovered UARS, a famous sleep researcher who came in with a couple of students, and he just took one look at me and was like, oh yeah, UARS. And for those who aren't familiar, upper airway resistance syndrome, it's the name for a form of sleep disordered breathing where you don't stop breathing, which is what apnea literally means, no breath. But you have enough flow restriction and you have a brain that freaks out from milder flow restrictions. And so it disturbs your sleep in the way that apnea does, but the actual flow restriction is milder, and that makes it much harder to diagnose. And the stereotype is before Guilleminot and UARS, the stereotypical apnea patient was an overweight man. Mm-hmm. And for UARS, he found the stereotype was a thin, hyperactive woman.
Interesting.
And I think there's a tie to hyperactivity, both because loss of sleep makes people more hyperactive, but also if your brain is kind of more sensitive and goes off more easily, then it's going to respond to flow restrictions with more of a freak out. And so I had sleep studies and stuff, and I kind of tried old style CPAP, not even APAP. Had trouble adjusting, didn't really work. And it was years later that I was like, shit, this sleep is bad. I'm good at dealing with low sleep. I'm good at powering through. I powered through for a lot of years, but I was like, this is not working. And so I did research and I sought out some experts, and I ended up working with the two main people is Dr. Barry Krakow, who's now retired, who was both a leading clinician and researcher about a lot of different things. I mean, connections with nightmares and, and ADHD and using the ASV machines instead of CPAP, something I want to talk about. And then the other is Dr. Casey Lee, who's a surgeon at Stanford, who's done a lot of research into the different sleep apnea surgeries and what works and what doesn't. And what I love is both of these people are both like leading researchers and clinicians. So like I researched them and read some of their body of work and then like got to work with them in clinical practice. And Dr. Krakow got me on ASV. Dr. Lee got me a couple of surgeries. And it's like my sleep is so stubborn that like a surgery that cures some people maybe took me from like a 3 out of 10 to a 4 out of 10. And
okay,
like,
what were the surgeries?
That's worth. Well, I had some small ones. I had some of the standard ones like tonsils and adenoids out. That didn't do anything. Nasal turbinate reduction definitely like helped my nasal airflow, but they would grow back in a few years. And the two big ones I had, maybe in like 2010 or 11, I had what's called the MMA, the maxillomandibular advancement, where they cut your face this way and advance your jaw to expand your airway front to back. And then more recently, maybe it was 2019 or something, I had his ease procedure, which is palate expansion. Much lower impact, but it's, they crack the palate and put in this bar that you rotate a little bit every day, and it expands the airway this way. And one thing that's important about Dr. Lee's procedure is that a lot of the palate expansion procedures are based on dental procedures, but for dental, what's most important is widening the front so that more teeth can fit in. Whereas for sleep apnea, what's most important is widening the back and the airway. And so procedures like Dr. Lee's that are kind of like customized to have the most impact in the back work a lot better than palate expansions, which are based on these dental procedures. So I had those. It helps some. ASV helps some too. But like, even now, after having worked on this for 20 years, my sleep is not great. But it's okay, and it's better. It's been improved by the journey.
Okay, wow, there's so much there. Dang, that was even more than I was expecting for the summary here. Because one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about was the structural angle versus the neurological angle.
Yeah.
And also, do you have any intuitions on whether there could be an infectious angle and perhaps overlapping with the neurological? So the reason I ask is, in our research and having some chronic health issues over a long period of time, we found on occasion, frequently, that it looks like what appear to be neurological problems can have their origins in like chronic infection, low-grade chronic infection.
Yeah.
And this crops up in a bunch of unexpected places, even situations like schizophrenia, which people think, they don't know what the origin of schizophrenia are. Well, when you go down the rabbit hole, there might be an infectious component, which is kind of mind-blowing. So I didn't know, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm familiar with some of the research about how like low-grade infections can cause some things that we don't associate with them, and I'm definitely a believer in that in general. I haven't looked into the sleep angle for that, but for sure, there's a bunch of, we have our breadcrumbs, right? Things like HPV causing cervical cancer, or like toxoplasmosis, like affecting we have our breadcrumbs. There's even a theory, I think it's unlikely, but Gregory Cochran has a theory about like homosexuality and infectious disease, where he kind of like looks at like he just looks at the characteristics of like what rates of homosexuality are in different populations and places and times, and says like it seems like there could be an epidemiological angle to this, which of course is like a super controversial.
Is this a recent? You said Cochran. I don't know the name. Because I know there was an earlier researcher who took this position and made a pretty convincing argument. I want to say this was like 80 plus years ago though, and then it was
No,
taboo.
Cochrane
So
is much more recent.
okay,
He's just kind of one of these independent thinkers and researchers who like comes up with weird theories. Like he's also
okay,
known he has a Jewish IQ hypothesis as well, and
okay,
the Cochrane Harpending thesis. Yeah, just a really interesting independent guy. Like I'm not totally sold on it,
yeah, yeah,
but it's just an example of how like, yeah, infectious disease might be behind a lot more than we think it is. But yeah, I'm
okay,
not very familiar with sleep. As far as like, I think structural and neurological are both real, and I kind of focused on the structural for a long time.
yeah,
And when you get older and you get into meditation and stuff, you get more interested in like nervous system regulation and what's going
yeah,
on. I definitely think that there is part of that. Like, I've wondered, like, I haven't been able to bring myself to do, say, like hardcore buteyko breathing or something, where like you get used to air hunger, as they call it. But I was like, well, if I got my brain more used to it, like maybe it would be more chill if I had like mild flow restrictions when I sleep.
uh-huh,
And I worked with a sleep focused team recently, a startup that's doing like high end sleep consulting, and they definitely stressed the neurological side and wanted me to
uh-huh,
do things like HRV biofeedback. Like I think there's something, you can kind of think of it as like two parts. There's like the insult, like I mean that in like the medical sense, right? Like the stress on the body from the structure, and then there's the response,
hmm.
right? And the insult, I think, is much more determined by structure, and the reaction is more determined by neurology. So they're both parts of it.
Okay, now, do you have thoughts then on the structure side of things? I know there are people who talk about mewing, trying to change their jaw structure. I think that's more at the muscular level, although maybe it connects with if you do it for long enough, maybe it can change how your bones hold together. Any thoughts on that?
I, I think it's really hard to do. It's really hard to get yourself to do a lot. And in order to change things, I mean, think about the difference between like a dental appliance that's putting bone pressure on to get your jaw to expand, and that's just like activating you 24/7, versus like some exercise that you have to do.
Mm,
I think like the amount of time that you have to do that exercise to change the structure is pretty high. And I mean, it kind of feels irrational to me that I don't do those things. I'm like, oh my God, sleep is so important. Like, if this worked, like it would be worth it. Um, but there's just like so many ideas for things to do, and I just think it's a really high investment one. Like I'm not
mm.
like I think it can work in people who like are diligent and do it, but you have to be doing a lot to change structure.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about your ideas on the topic then. So you've been working with this, you've been working on this for 20 years. Sounds like you've had multiple surgeries. Do you have now your personal angle, like one dominant theory that you're working with? Are you still in the potpourri stage where like it could be this, could be
Mhm.
this, could be a mixture of all of them together? What are you leaning?
But like for me or in general?
Both. First for you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think one thing that I guess like a hypothesis I have, because I've like done a lot of things to fix my sleep, and yet it's still like somewhat broken. And to me, there's an open question of like, is that an associational thing? And I'm considering doing like sleep restriction therapy, where our brains are associational machines, and if you sleep badly for a long time, your brain could get used to sleeping badly.
Mm,
And so, is it that like I'm used to it, right? And I need to do something to reset my brain and get it used to something better, or is it that I haven't addressed all of the issues and there's still like structure? I mean, I with UARS in general, it's hard to measure in labs, and like an average sleep lab probably can't tell that you have it because they're set up for these like huge flow restrictions and
mm,
massive oxygen saturation drops. And it takes like a more sensitive lab looking at like RERAs, um, in order to detect it. And in my case, like I've had surgeries and like the flow restriction has gotten more mild, and like I still feel like I have it, and that like I'll wake up with my heart pounding.
Uh-huh.
But like when people like look at my like sleep studies, or like a medical grade sleep ring, they're like, it doesn't seem like you really have significant sleep disordered breathing anymore. And I'm kind of
Wow.
torn between like, is it not sensitive enough, or do I have a different problem?
Okay, so quick aside here, very related to what you just said. I had a conversation that hasn't been released yet with a doctor from France. And we were talking about methodological problems in medicine. And one of them that he brought up was, let's say, the threshold problem with testing. So he said, in a very humorous way, that he was so stupid because he was teaching people for 20 years. He's also a MD PhD, so he's got a clinic and a lab and is doing academic research. He said he was teaching people 20 some plus years that urine was sterile. And why was that the line, that urine is sterile? Because when they run the tests to detect whether or not there's the presence of pathogens, if the test comes back negative, like a good scientist, we therefore conclude, well, then there isn't infection present. And then eventually he learned, well, actually, there's a threshold issue there where if you get a more sensitive test, it turns out no urine is sterile. There is small amounts of
Mm,
pathogens, maybe throughout the whole body, but especially in the urine. And he was saying this sort of changed his view on what infection means. So if there's the presence of something, it might be a small presence, but if it's not supposed to be there, it still qualifies as infection. So it sounds like I didn't, it sounds like a direct example of this sort of methodological issue that the tests are telling you, hey, your sleep looks fine on paper, but like the empirical reality is obviously it's still disordered.
yeah, exactly. And when the tests say that, when before they were like, oh yeah, we see some disturbance, it seems kind of mild, and like I'm having a strong impact on my sleep, it's like my expectation is that the tests are like under reflecting,
Yeah.
and I have to go to other evidence like, why else would I wake up with my heart pounding?
And
you
does
know
it
what
come
I
with
mean?
nightmares? You mentioned that before. Is it still, are
Um,
they connected?
well, that's more about Dr. Krigell's research, that a lot of people
Oh,
who are having nightmares actually have
uh-huh.
sleep apnea. I do have the experience, if I like sleep without the CPAP or whatever, or have like a bad night because my nose is congested, I will have like high anxiety dreams.
Hmm.
But not to a degree that like wakes me up, but it's just like the entire dream is colored with like this anxiety of like I'm not quite getting enough air.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. The reason I ask is they're working with the infectious hypothesis here. There is perhaps some connection between neurological infection and nightmares and sleep paralysis. So when people get those really wild dreams where they feel like it could be like an out of body experience. They're talking with an alien that's sitting on their chest. Very high stress, very weird, extreme dreams. It could be
Hmm,
reflective of some infectious component in the neurology. So I didn't know if that was something that you were
interesting.
dealing with. Yeah. Okay. So take us through then. What more do you want to say on your
Yeah.
research on the topic here?
So one thing is like there's a lot of resistance to CPAP, right? And people are always trying to find better things, and I get it. It sucks to sleep with a mask on my face. I feel like most people don't understand like why CPAP works so well and why it's hard to compete with it. And just imagine that you have a straw that you're breathing through, and like the default way is like you suck, and that straw is your airway. And the default way is that you suck on one end of the straw, and the air comes in. But of course, when you're sucking, you're generating like negative partial pressure within the straw, and that pulls it inwards.
Hmm.
That makes it want to collapse. And if the straw has flaws, if it's weak, if it's bent, then sucking on it will make it perform worse. And what CPAP does, there's a an EMT metaphor for CPAP as an air splint. And like a splint in the airway sense, like for example, suppose someone's in a car accident, their face got messed up, they'll take this like plastic thing that has a hole in it to breathe, and they'll like put it in the nose, And the idea is if there's swelling or whatever that's closing the nose, this like pushes past and opens up and like leaves an airway. That's like a splint. It's like splinting open the airway. And CPAP is an air splint, where if you imagine instead of sucking on the bottom end of the straw, something pushes air into the top end. This has literally the opposite effect. Instead of like a negative partial pressure that's sucking the walls in of the straw, it's a positive partial pressure that's pushing the straw open. And it does this for the entire airway because it's an air splint and the airway is full of air. And the idea that like, actually this is, it's annoying and people hate it and it's hard to get used to the masks, but it's actually doing a profound and deeply powerful thing. Which is like splinting open your airway so that it performs better instead of worse from sucking on it. And so I think that, I see a lot of like everybody wants to find something that's not CPAP, but I think that people should be really like humble about that and get like it's actually doing this powerful, powerful thing. So that's one thing.
So on that, that's like a technical analysis of what's going on with the CPAP. There's another side of it, which is the experiential usage of the CPAP. So I've unfortunately, when I've had bad waves and we'd have to break out the CPAP machine, it is undeniable the difference in sleep quality when you've got the CPAP machine on versus you don't. I mean, it's beyond the realm of doubt. It's not in your head. There has to be some underlying technical thing going on because it's night and day, the difference if you need it and you have it versus you need it and you don't have it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another thing on the CPAP thing, and this is Dr. Krakow's research, is that we'll have to get a little technical again, but the way that a CPAP works is it's blowing into that end of the straw with like a fixed amount of pressure, and it tries to keep that pressure constant. And something like a BiPAP is just like, well, two pressures, one when you're breathing in, one when you're breathing out, because those are different, right? The straw doesn't need to be pushed open as much when it's getting pushed from the other side, when you're blowing instead of sucking. Or an APAP that maybe over the course of minutes will like slowly change that constant pressure. What an ASV machine is, adaptive servo ventilation, it's monitoring the breath constantly and making micro adjustments many times a second. And its goal is to keep what's called tidal volume constant. That's the total amount of air that goes in and out. So rather than having a constant pressure, which is kind of like an input, it's using algorithms to try to manage the output. And what these are mainly prescribed for is central apnea, where some people have the reaction to the CPAP pressure. Their brain is just like, oh, there's pressure. We don't need to bother to breathe. And ASV will obviously notice that it's not getting the tidal volume, and it'll ramp up the pressure and push the air in and breathe for you, like a ventilator. And what Dr. Krakow's research found is that for basically every population that he studied, ASV performed better than CPAP. And it makes sense. It's just a more sophisticated control technology, right? And so it's not surprising. It's able to like smooth out the breath curve much more effectively. And these machines, they're like an extra $1,000 or something. Like maybe it's like $2,000 for a good CPAP and $3,000 for a good ASV. So because of that price difference, insurance usually won't cover it. But in my experience and the research that I've seen is they're more effective for almost everyone. And so I find that almost nobody knows this.
Are they still as annoying as the CPAP machine in terms of sound? Okay.
Yes, they are. Absolutely. It's a more advanced CPAP. So this is one of these things that I've learned that I find hardly anyone knows is that if you have some extra budget, ASV is close to strictly superior. It's just a more advanced technology that's kind of better for everyone.
Okay.
One thing that you mentioned before this is this question of like root causes. Mm-hmm. And, I'm of the opinion that apnea is to some degree like a disease of modernity. And to me, the strongest thing seems to be that we eat soft foods and we don't get enough.
That was on my list, was to ask you about the soft food angle.
Yeah, like the way it's just we see evidence with this with like the homeoblock or the other like mouth devices that put pressure and get the jaw to expand. Is like, we think of bone as being a solid, but actually, if you zoom out over a long enough time scale, bone is sort of liquid. Like it will respond to pressure, over the course of weeks and months and years. And it seems like it was designed to have the stimulation um, of chewing, of needing to chew, of eating chewy foods, think like beef jerky, and that stimulates the jaw to expand and grow. Um, and we feed our kids much softer foods, much more processed foods, and so they don't get that jaw development. And I think there's other things going on, but think of like the Weston A. Price research, right? Like
Yep.
you might have been wrong about the specific drivers of that. I know there's a lot of doubt about that, but like the difference in the jaws of those populations is like undeniable. Um, you know, and they have like wider, more fully developed jaws, and that means a bigger airway, and that means not having apnea. So I don't think soft foods is the only thing, but I think it's a huge thing.
In the spirit of the Weston Price angle, for those who have not read his seminal work, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, I think it's called, it's spectacular, and there are pictures involved. If you want to see the jaw, the aforementioned jaws, you can actually see like their face there is healthier and more structured. One of the things he talks about is he speculates on specific nutrients that are important and absent from modern diets versus traditional diets. He talks about, is everything all right over there? I just want to make sure.
I spilled some water, but it's almost clean.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that wasn't that emergency. Anyway, he one of the impressive achievements of Weston Price is he comes up with this theory of, I believe he calls it vitamin X. And he says, there's this vitamin X. I don't exactly know what it is, but I can tell you it's in, it's in butter, it's in these other foods. And he just saw the pattern, didn't understand exactly what it was, but he said there should be a vitamin here. And it turned out that I believe it was vitamin K, if I recall, in butter. That turns out to have the properties that he expected it did, just based on the empirical observing of there must be some ingredient in these foods. So do you have any take on the fat soluble vitamin angle? Like maybe in addition to the soft foods, we're missing some key nutritional thing that they are getting in the tribal groups, but not in the modern ones?
Yeah, I don't have as strong an opinion about that, but it does seem clear that like modernity makes our jaws small and crowded.
Okay.
In modernity, you need your wisdom teeth out, right? And it's a great question to dig into that and figure out why. But I don't know as much about that.
Okay. What's next on your list?
Let's see. That's a lot of it. One thing is I think people try like the minor surgeries a lot. I don't know, hyoid or genioglossus or tonsils or adenoids or whatever. And they can sometimes work, but in Dr. Casey Lee, the surgeon at Stanford I worked with, in his research, he found like a lot of the time they don't work, and we're not able to predict when. It's fine if something doesn't work for a lot of people if you can figure out when and only give it to the people that it will help. But we're not really able to do that. And so I think there's a lot of like surgeries happening that, because people are desperate. Like I've been there, sounds like you've been there. It's like, oh my gosh, please help me. If you have to chop off a piece of me, go for it. But they're not that like strong.
Right.
They mostly don't work, and it's not that predictable. And I think that like the palate expansion, I guess I recommend it pretty strongly, because like when I got the MMA, it was like days in the hospital, like jaw banded together, several months of recovery. Whereas the palate expansion is like outpatient, um, no nights in the hospital, and there was like very little recovery. Like you have to do Invisalign afterwards, and it really works. Like it expanded my nasal airway a lot. It Some people get these types of palate expansion surgeries for physical beauty. Some people get it for
Mm,
singing because they sing better,
interesting.
and it really affects like your smell to like open up that nasal passage and back. And in the research, it has as much of an impact on apnea as the MMA. And so, this is something that's changed in like the last 10 years. It's like a much better, like you want to do that one first.
Okay, that's a good piece. That's a good data point. I actually, true story. I had a palatal separator when I was a kid. I don't even remember why. I was a pretty sickly kid, and I remember getting the device. I mean, I was probably 10. And at the time, I don't know what the technology is now, but there was a little key that you had to put in the middle of the
Hmm.
device, and you twist it. And I
Yeah.
absolutely hated it. So I have vague memories of one of my
Mhm.
parents like chasing me around because I was like I wanted to tap out and not to keep doing the palatal separator. What do you have any thoughts on mouth taping?
Yeah. I think it's one of the, it definitely helps some people, and it's really easy to try. It's really cheap. I'm a strong proponent, not in the sense of like this will help everyone, but like it's a great tool. And like the sleep team that I worked with this year was like pro mouth taping. There's some like commercial product you can use, Somnifix or something, that I used. And I think mainstream doctors are like reluctant because it's like closing off a part of your airway
Hmm.
or whatever, but it's safe and it really helps some people. Like
Have you
definitely.
experimented with it?
Yeah, it doesn't seem it doesn't seem to help me,
Hmm.
but I've
Yeah,
done it.
that's an important piece of the puzzle here that you mentioned, the non-uniformity of people's responding to different things. I think this is just part of the complexity problem that happens in the chronic disease world all the time, everywhere. Is you
Yeah.
have protocols that work for 20% of the people, and then those when you listen to what those 20% say, a lot of times the theory is kind of weird, but like, hey, it works. So just
Yeah.
add it to the basket. And so you got the mouth tapers over here with sleep apnea, you got the CPAP, you got the palatal separation. And the expectation should be this is not simple. Whatever's going on, it's not simple. And, try the things that are less invasive, and then maybe you'll
Yes.
succeed with them. There's an analogy in the advanced Lyme disease world where there is a surgery that people get on their spine, and it's for some people it's miraculous, but for a lot of people, it's spine surgery, and it can make things worse, and you definitely don't want to make that first thing you do on your list. But one overlapping question is in the chronic infection world, there are one intersecting circle are people theorizing about collagen degradation, and that seems to there's an interesting angle here, which is some infections like to eat collagen, but we'll put that aside for the moment. In the collagen world, people they might say they have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or they have some collagen, some like genetic collagen deficiency, so that causes some of the structural weaknesses, and then the structural weaknesses, have an effect on their nerves because the structure is not as rigid as it's supposed to be. Any take on the possible connection with collagen and collagen degradation here?
Yeah, it's not something I know. That's not something I know anything about.
Okay.
So what's is the idea that like collagen degradation impairs like airway patency?
Yeah. So the idea would be that structurally, just like with the jaw, if there's not enough air that's going into the airway, you can have there's dysfunction. The idea is that your just like if the bone is deficient, you're not going to have as much rigidity as you need. If the collagen is deficient, you have sagging. let's say,
Yeah.
and the consequences of sagging, where you don't want
Yeah,
it.
like lower tone.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
airway tone is a thing, right? I think isn't there's been at least one implantable device that was like using electricity to try to stimulate the airway to like improve airway tone. And one of the things about sleep apnea is that when we're asleep, our muscle tone goes down. Of course, we're relaxing, and less muscle tone means that the airway is not as firm. So that's definitely a thing. What you were saying about like the 20% in the chronic disease world, it reminds me of like of ketamine for depression, where like the success rate of ketamine for depression is lower than like the SSRIs and our other first line treatments, but it has a completely independent mechanism of action, and its outcome is like uncorrelated. And so it can be miraculous for people who tried the like SSRIs and the standard first line treatments, not because it's better, but because it's a fresh roll of the dice.
Yeah.
And if the first two SSRIs didn't work for you, there's a good chance that the third SSRI won't work for you either. And like it's not that it's better, it's that it's different. And so
Yeah.
when you have things that only work for some people, you really want to find like uncorrelated things that like leverage different mechanisms.
Right. Yeah, that's important. Going back to the idea of the neurological central nervous system connection, have you gone down the vagus nerve stimulation rabbit hole?
Some
Okay.
I've done a lot of like meditation focused on like the vagus nerve. I use this device. This is the Apollo neuroscience wearable. It
Can you put it
vibrates.
closer to the center? I can't see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Nice.
So it vibrates on your pulse points, and I have this issue where like most of the interventions I try in my life, in like not just for sleep but for anything, like I don't feel any effect. That's just like my standard experience, and it's frustrating. And it's like, what do I try? Well, do I do it based on the research? Can I really motivate myself when I'm tired all the time to do this thing if I like don't feel it working? And because I did so much meditation on the vagus nerve, like with the Apollo, it's kind of like it has different vibrating patterns that do different things. And there's like several of the modes, like the relaxation one, where I can literally like feel it activating my vagus nerve because
Wow.
I did like, 100+ hours of meditation, messing around with different things while like focusing on like my vagal system and vagal activation. And so I can actually feel it working. And it's
Wow.
like such a joy to have something where like it's a small effect, it's not powerful, but like I know it works.
Is the
So
effect just in your general well-being, or is it specifically related to the apnea? Have you noticed?
it doesn't help the apnea,
Okay.
but for example, if you need to down regulate, like it's like tickling the vagus nerve. It's like like the vibrations are like affecting it in like a mild but constant way.
Yeah.
Um, and
The Facebook algorithm has gotten me because as I'll be scrolling on, I've done a lot of research on vagus nerve. It also has an interesting infectious angle that I'm curious about. But somehow Facebook outwinded this. So now I'll see the ads will come up of all the new fandangled vagus nerve stimulators. It'll come up the ones you wear on the neck. I'm like, okay, I actually haven't tried them yet, but there's a
yeah,
lot of lines of inquiry that sort of point that there's something real there.
well, yeah, and isn't there's an implantable that I wasn't
Yep.
very familiar with. A bunch of people asked me about that's like a vagus nerve stimulator. So
Yes.
what's the mechanism where I mean, obviously, like relaxation improves sleep. That's the
Yeah.
neurological side. Is that the angle? Like, what's the structural
Okay.
effect?
So first response is dunno, because the complexity of the vagus nerve is terrifying to me. But I know a few random facts about it. So there is an implantable one that's been used for depression, and it's electrical stimulation. And one of the interesting things about the vagus nerve is it's asymmetrical. So you have the vagus nerve branches. You have two. You got the left one and the right one, and they do different things. They connect to different organs in the body, and so on your body is asymmetrical. So you have the liver on the right side, and you don't have a liver on the left side. And so I know that when they're implanting that particular device, they have to put them on one. I want to say it's the right side. Don't quote me on that. Because if they put it on the other side, it can interfere with the heart, the regulation of the heart, because apparently the vagus nerve has a connection or loops over the heart in some way. So they can only put it on one side of the body, which is interesting. But yeah, my understanding of mechanism is a little electrical zaps. That's about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So definitely like relaxation and being in rest and digest instead of fight or
Yeah,
flight helps with sleep.
I
And I'm
think
just
that's the
curious
idea.
what it does to like muscle tone.
Yeah.
Because there's also some like negative effect of relaxation on muscle tone, right?
Right, right, and I
And
know
I'm
that
curious
is
about
some of the skeptical. Skeptical is not the right word. The critical take on on external vagus stimulation is precisely that you can get paradoxical effects, where then the body is sort of relying on this external stimulation, and then you get a further weakening of tone in effect. So
that.
that's another angle. But.
Yeah, interesting.
Okay, I got two more questions for you on my list. One, not to be scatterbrained here, but something I should have asked before when I asked you about nightmares is, do you deal with night sweats at all? Where you overheat
So,
and then
no,
start
not
sweating?
not usually.
Okay,
No. I've
okay, because
had it
that
occasionally during periods of my life of like low health, but it's not regular.
Okay. And just the reason being that, just like with the sleep paralysis, that has some connection with the night sweats, which has some infectious connection with specifically with the infection Babesia, which is one of the common co-infections of Lyme disease. One of the things it seems to do, or one of the telltale signs seems to be dysfunctional sleep with nightmares and extreme night sweats. So I didn't know if that was related.
Interesting. Yeah, I
And
mean,
then
this nightmares thing reminds me. I do. I mean, when you get into something, I feel like you tend to see it everywhere. But
Yeah,
I really think objectively that sleep disordered breathing is way underdiagnosed,
yeah,
and that it's actually like much more widespread, um, and that you know not always in the classic people, not always in like overweight people,
right.
or people. Honestly, I think that like looking at how recessed someone's jaw is like a stronger signal than like their weight, because that
But
really seems.
yeah, it's funny that you say that because my wife and I have come to the same conclusion, and so it turns out there's something to physiognomy. That making
Absolutely.
reasoned having intuitions about somebody's well-being or their health or their mind possibly based on their facial composition. It's
Yeah,
another taboo
absolutely.
idea. Yeah.
Right? I mean, well, I mean, look, well, or like foreheads and intelligence or something. Like,
Yeah.
look, IQ correlates like 0.3 with like externally measured skull size and like 0.4 with MRI measured like brain volume.
Hmm.
Like like point 0.4 is pretty high. So like and surely like it's like physically impossible to have differences in brain volume like not be detectable,
Yeah.
not result in changes in how things look externally. So, I think the problem with these ideas is when they're based on bad science and people like are making wrong conclusions, then that sucks. But like obviously there's going to be things about your face that like
Right.
signal things about the state of your health.
Okay, so a fun speculative one that the last physiognomic connection I had heard went down the rabbit hole. Is like, ooh, this is a pattern I do see is actually forehead slope. Have you heard about this one?
Mm,
There's some connection between psychopathy or sociopathy and
yeah.
having an extreme forehead slope. And so I'm going through the list
That's where the
of
frontal lobes are.
right, and
Like if
so
you have a slope, you don't have as much room for your frontal lobes. It's very
So
simple.
if you look at pictures of Joseph Stalin, I mean, the guy is just angled like, straight back. And I'm like, okay. I know. So there are other, if you go through examples of people that are, mass murderers or whatever, there does seem to be some interesting connection with head slope. So that one's fun.
Yeah. I mean, the mechanism is simple.
Okay, so the last question I have written down, at least, is: do you have researchers And you mentioned a few researchers before. Do you have researchers who you think are doing really good work here, either in the academy, outside the academy? Biohackers. Anybody that you're like you think is really tracking the apnea question closely and correctly?
Dr. Krakow, his most recent book, it doesn't have a great title or cover, but I did a blurb for it. It's kind of like a really broad ranging summary of his like research and knowledge. Like I recommend him strongly. Whereas like Dr. Lee and Dr. Krakow publishes lots of papers. It's just that he's also written it up for a general audience. Maybe it's called like Sleep Better or something. And here, let me find it. And for the like the more I don't know. Oh yeah, it's called Life Saving Sleep. That's
Okay.
kind of his latest. And a lot of the alternative stuff, I feel like it's interesting to explore, but like my experience has been that it just doesn't have enough power. I just think of like what is the impact on me of ASV or palate expansion, versus like some breathing exercises or rinsing my nose with saline or something. Like I
Mm-hmm.
can imagine someone with a specific problem that those would help, but they're just so much like narrower,
Mm-hmm.
um, and only work in specific cases. So, I've kind of found looking at all the alternative stuff is it's like somewhat overwhelming. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
there's all these different things to try that all are like plausible but unproven. And I'm like, fuck, I'm tired. Like, how am I going to sort through this? Um, yeah, I haven't seen a lot of great stuff.
Any other than a Krakow that you're any random substacker that's like this person's hot on the trail?
I wish.
Okay, that's my
um,
position too.
I do think like like I'm a big fan of forums as like communities of practice that develop knowledge over time. I'm sure
Hmm.
this is a big thing in the chronic disease world, like the CPAP talk forums, for example. They're like so valuable, especially if you're just like, fuck, I hate CPAP, but I'm trying to make it work.
Hmm.
They have like all kinds of advice on different things you can try and adjustments you can make. And yeah, that's kind of like where I hung out when I was in my most active stage of researching this stuff. It might have been how I learned about Dr. Krakow,
Hmm.
um, or Dr. Lee. So yeah, those communities of practice are really good. But what I haven't seen is people like drawing on the communities of practice and doing like really good write ups to like
Yeah.
extract the knowledge. I haven't seen that for sleep disordered breathing, unfortunately.
Yep. Yep. Same situation in the chronic disease world. There's fractured forums. There's so many different ones that have some piece of the puzzle, but they're very few. There are a couple who I think are doing really good work. Like clinicians, but generally speaking, the information doesn't propagate out of the forum into heavier research, real research.
I kind of hate saying these letters, but like this seems like an AI solvable problem, right?
Yeah.
Like give it all over the forums and be like, please extract the most common recommendations, like the most like unique suggestions that are plausible, right? Like what if there was like a protocol that was derived from all the discussions in these forums, what would that protocol look like? Like I feel
Yeah.
like we're, you know, I don't know. I have plenty of skepticism about AI, but this is what it's good at.
Yes, that would be the perfect use case. Literally, just eat a bunch of words and then average them and tell me what the average is.
Yeah, for sure. So please, somebody do this.
Yes. Okay. Anything else? That was all the questions I had for you. Anything else?
No, I think we hit the most important things.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for
I guess
sharing. Yeah.
maybe the last thing. I mean, this is like probably chronic disease. People know this, but like when you have a condition that affects your ability to do stuff, you know, you get this reinforcement where like you're worse at doing stuff, and so you're not able to take care of yourself, and things get worse, and that absolutely sucks. And what I found is that when I did an intervention that helped, my inclination is always to like take that extra energy and use it to try to catch up on the things in my life that get dropped because of my chronic disease.
Yeah.
And I think that that's wrong and like risks you falling back in the pit. And actually, like, whenever you can invest that energy into like a long-term solution, you should like aggressively prefer to do that. Um, and it can be hard to leave stuff on fire in your life when you have some energy, but like you're just gonna, a lot of these things get worse as you get older, for example.
Right.
Like you're gonna fall right back in that hole, and it's tough because often there's not clear things to sink energy into that will make your chronic disease better. This is all the complexity and the uncertainty, and I get that, and that's a different thing that sucks. But I would just say that like when there are things that you can do, like put your energy into getting out of the hole.
Yes, and on another optimistic note, so my wife and I have been dealing with chronic health problems for some time now, and probably 15 years. Things are fortunately getting a lot better. Anyway, just in
Great.
that time frame, there have been really interesting advancements in research and advancements in practice, and there really are constant progressions that people are making on all kinds of lines. Even if something seems dire and hopeless and you haven't made progress yet, it might be, especially with AI, not to overhype it, but I think in the next 5, 10 years, 20, 15 years, we really might see an explosion of treatments for all kinds of different diseases. I do think we're kind of on the brink of that.
Yeah, and biotech is like finally useful. I feel like after like a lot of, after like decades of them having to develop the tools and figure out how things worked, it's like actually able to like make interventions much more effectively now. There's a lot of regulatory challenges to that,
Right.
but the tech is kind of finally useful. So I
Yep.
agree. I think we're going to see a lot more new treatments coming out.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your story and your insights here. I hope that other people have found this valuable as well.
All right. Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.